I am Brenda Avadian of The Caregiver's Voice, and welcome to this edition of Voices with Dementia. Our guest today is Jeff Borghoff. Welcome, Jeff.
Thank you. Very nice to be with you today.
And Jeff, I'll start out. What was your diagnosis?
Certainly. So in the spring of 2016, March, I was officially diagnosed with younger-onset, early-stage Alzheimer's disease. After about a year of misdiagnoses, I finally was able to get a spinal tap that checked for the toxic tau protein. And then follow-up to that, I was able to also get into a clinical trial, and they tested me with what they call the beta amyloid PET scan, and that's where they actually found the Alzheimer's plaque in my brain.
And they saw the accumulation of the amyloid.
That's correct. Yeah, the plaquing they found, yes.
Yeah, and Lisa Genova, the neuroscientist and also the author of Still Alice, talked about that last year in her TED Talk in Vancouver. Mm-hmm. And she mentioned that the amyloid accumulates in people's brains, and those who have microglia, the janitors of the brain that don't do an adequate job of cleaning up, those are the ones who are then struck by Alzheimer's, because those amyloid plaques destroy the synapses in people's brains. So
neurons, correct.
That's wow. And what did you do before? What was your work before you were diagnosed?
Sure. So prior to that, for about 20 years, I was a senior technical architect, and so that's probably the career term for it. But I basically developed computer software systems. I was a systems architect.
You were a geeky guy then.
I'm a nerd.
Yeah, and 20 years ago, geeky was not as cool as it is today.
It certainly wasn't. I started back in the when you were swapping floppy disks.
Yeah. The five inchers, right? The big ones.
Yeah.
Yeah. Computers don't even come with those. So if you have even the 3.5 inchers, yes.
No.
And
this computer is more powerful than my first one.
Oh, of course. And even some of the watches are more powerful than the Apollo mission.
Indeed.
Yeah. So what led you then to going to be assessed? Because you said for a whole year you were misdiagnosed, or they were struggling to come up with a diagnosis.
Certainly, yeah. It was a interesting turn of events. I was approaching. I had just turned 50. And I had been transitioned from one role in my company into a role where I was leading a large team, or large relative to the size of our company, team of folks that were much younger than me to do large scale projects. And what I found was that I was not able to kind of keep up with them with regard to memory, remembering things, some of the cognitive things that were multitasking. And I really started to think that, okay, maybe I'm 50 years old.
I'm smiling because you're an old...
Yeah, that's fine. I get it. I was right there. And these guys are just graduating from college. So here, I call them young whippersnappers coming out of college with degrees in computer science, and here I am, 20 years veteran, and I started to think, well, maybe it's just part of it. I'm not as fast, as those guys. But and so I kind of like use that as an excuse. But what was happening was because of that, I was beginning to get sort of stressed and anxious about a lot of it, and it started to manifest itself physically. I began having these really horrible facial twitches and a drooping of my face on this side. And so we went to the doctor, and it got progressively. Went to my regular physician, my primary care physician, and she said keep an eye on it. And she said if it keeps continuing to droop, get over to the ER, because they thought maybe I had Bell's palsy or possibly even having a stroke. So it actually started to get a little bit worse, and my wife said, let's get over to the ER, let's figure out what's going on. And going through that, I got increasingly stressed and anxious, and so I started. My body started going into this thing called the myoclonic twitching. It's very similar to at the end of the evening when you're laying in bed and your legs kind of like release and kind of like jump and spaz a little bit. So that's normal. That's called myoclonic twitching. However, I was doing it all day long, kind of all over my body, and I couldn't control it. So
now I'm wondering Parkinson's, right?
Yeah. So
exactly.
Yeah. So, well, at first they diagnosed me with epilepsy.
Oh, yeah.
Well, so they were dosing me with epileptic drugs, which completely turned me into a zombie. I went from that particular neurologist. We decided to go to a better a university hospital in Pennsylvania, and they said, no, you don't have epilepsy. So they began testing me for other things. They began, testing me for Creutzfeldt-Jakob's, Huntington's disease.
All rare forms of dementia.
Yeah. Yes, indeed. And so they and the thing is they didn't go with Parkinson's because I was able to control it. I got to a point where I was able to control the twitching. So they said, well, this can't be Parkinson's because you wouldn't be able to control it.
And Jeff, when is this? What year about?
This was probably the latter half of 2015 into the beginning of 2016.
So, okay, It's happening pretty quick. The symptoms, everything is just accelerating. Yeah,
and so, and a lot of it had to do, a lot of the symptoms that I was feeling, the neurological symptoms that were occurring, were really an onslaught coming from my stress and anxiety as well that I was feeling, because there was something definitely wrong with me neurologically, but we couldn't figure out what it was, and none of the doctors would even approach the idea that it could be Alzheimer's. So we finally got to the point where we saw one doctor, and he said that all the doctors were saying, we don't want to go down the road of testing for Alzheimer's because we really don't think it's Alzheimer's because you're too young. So they test everything else out. They rule everything else out. And the last person that we spoke to, which was a movement specialist, neurological movement specialist, because of the twitching, he said that I don't think what I thought you had is what you have. And so I want you to go buy this book. It's a book about meditation. So my wife looked at me, she looked at the doctor, and she said, okay, thanks very much. We got out of there. Then we went to the Columbia Presbyterian Medical Center of Neurology, and we sat with the doctor there for about 2.5 hours. And she said, Jeff, I think you have Alzheimer's. And so they started testing me. They gave me,
wow.
so they set
when
me up.
the whole PET scan, all of that came forth, and that. So, what was your reaction when? And well, how did they tell you, and what was your reaction?
That was really rough because at that point, what she said, they gave me the spinal tap, and that's where they found the toxic tau protein, but it was very little. And it was just on the line of the spectrum where they think that you might have Alzheimer's. They weren't quite sure. But they knew I had a neurological memory problem because I went through like a 6-hour neuropsychological exam, and I did miserable on it. And so that'd
be long enough to give anybody a problem.
Oh, yeah. And, that's for sure. Yeah, oh my gosh, the questions were, yeah. But
how did they present that to you? How did they say it finally, and what was your reaction?
Well, that's so what happened was my wife called the doctor to get the results, and the doctor said to my wife, yes, it's Alzheimer's, but she was at work, so she called me up. And she said, Jeff, I just spoke with the doctor. I'm coming home. I was like, oh, okay. All right. So she came home.
You didn't ask her what she heard?
No.
You kind of knew something was
home. She told me. Yeah, it was one of those things where it's just like, all right, it's probably worst case scenario. So we went to the park. We sat on the park bench, and she told me, and we both cried because we knew what the prognosis was at that point. But what's interesting is that
Are you still working?
No, at that point I actually had I had actually not been working for about 2 months. I was on short-term disability, but the doctor had asked me to stop working because she was concerned that the work and stress would make it worse. And I really wasn't performing well at work. So it was kind of a bad situation because at that point I was so stressed out. I couldn't drive. They told me not to drive.
You are the only one I know so far in these interviews we've been doing for Voices with Dementia for over 3 years who received the diagnosis through your wife by phone from the doctor, and then your wife came home to deliver it to you. Most of the people get it in person. That's a new experience for me to hear. And you sat there at the park bench and you cried, both of you. Did you have any of your benefits in place? Because once they put that label on your record, it limits the opportunities you have.
Yeah. So, first of all, the reason why it was kind of done by phone is because from my house in the medical center in New York is probably about 3 hours away. So it just was better for it to happen that way. However, after we did get the news, we did make an appointment with her, and we saw her. We went to see her because I wanted to find out what the next steps were, and she was great about that. So it might be unique, but by some of the standards that you've met, but it really had to do with timing and location and
how fortunate that your neurologist was cooperative to do that, because some offices say, oh, HIPAA, I can't talk to your wife. We have to tell you, you have to come in. It has to be done in person. And how fortunate that these folks seem to be more understanding and more personally connected. I want to ask you, because your father also was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, but he was diagnosed later in life, right?
Yeah. So my dad is he has vascular dementia. He's had several strokes, so we know that he has vascular dementia. But we actually never got him tested for Alzheimer's.
Oh.
So it's possible that there's some Alzheimer's, because it's not unusual for dementia patients to have mixed, various mixed. So it could be there, but we're not 100% certain. But we are certain of the vascular dementia.
And where is your father now? Is he with?
Oh, he lives with us.
Okay.
Yeah. So what's interesting is that prior to the onset of my symptoms, we knew my dad was showing some later onset dementia. So we actually converted our 2-car garage into an apartment. And so, and then I was almost a month after they moved in. So it was really interesting how the whole thing, but we actually have, it's, it's a blessing because we're all here together helping each other out. I help out with my dad during the day, and it's really, it's a very surreal thing to be living with Alzheimer's and helping your father who's living with dementia.
So you
somewhat
would
surreal.
be literally an Alzheimer's caregiver. And when I say that, I really mean that literally. In other words, you are a person with Alzheimer's who is also a caregiver.
Yeah.
That's a new spin on that term. Yeah. So
yeah,
I wanted to go ahead.
Yeah, I take care of him. I help him move around. Just sometimes he has trouble getting into bed. I help him stay hydrated. I talk to him, play games. I try to do everything that I try to do everything with him that I would like somebody to do for me.
I love that. I love that. And especially when you do that because you know what it's like. So you go beyond the golden rule, and you engage in what I call the diamond tip of caregiving, which means that you treat your father the way you would want to be treated. That's where the golden rule stops. And the diamond tip for caregivers begins at, you treat your father the way you would want to be treated if you had the same disease or illness. And Jeff, you do. And what are some of the common reactions you're getting from people? Because I look at you, of course, you look fine. You're not blithering. You're not drooling. Those are the stereotypes we have. You're young. Yes. You're sitting up. We're having a conversation. What are the reactions you get from people?
Well, the most common is you don't look like you have Alzheimer's. But of us in the community of younger onset, early stage, we say that I am the face of Alzheimer's.
Yeah.
And
perfect, right there. I wish we could have just ended it there, because no, seriously, that you say that again. I am the face of Alzheimer's.
I am the face of Alzheimer's.
Perfect. Because, that's how we're raising awareness about this disease and, reducing that stigma where when I started 22 years ago, we did see the drool, or people could not communicate as you guys are. And I'll ask you, what is your advice for people like me? And I call myself a PWOD. That stands for person without dementia. PWOD. So, what is your advice?
What's interesting
for us
is that if we don't do something to eradicate these neurodegenerative diseases, you won't be a PWOD, you'll be a PWOD and add a Y to the end. A person without yet.
Yet, a PWOD.
So, a PWOD. So what we need to do is we need to,
Yeah.
first, one of the things that I do that takes up a lot of my time is advocacy and awareness. And since my diagnosis, that's really all I've done. That's my new purpose in life. But for those people who, the PWATs, I would really stress that dementia, in all of its various forms, we're not crazy. We're not something that should be society should be shunned by society. One of the things that really upsets those of us in the community of people living with dementia and a lot of our caregivers is how carefree and carelessly people will use the term Alzheimer's or dementia to demean other people.
And by that, do you mean like if I say, "Oh, Jeff, it's nothing, I forget too"?
Well, that's one way, but I think it's actually gone to really a almost a viral way or vicious way that we see, on TV, news, and social media, where people are demeaning other people and telling them that they're acting like they have Alzheimer's or dementia, or it's just really cruel.
I hear you. We've seen a lot of that lately in the media, and it's from leaders.
It's hurtful because
Yeah.
the people are using they're using my disease to hurt other people, and
Yes.
no idea what it is to live with Alzheimer's or other dementia. And so that's a visceral thing that we see that we don't like.
And it's pioneers like you who are continuing to raise awareness to make sure that people, as you said, Jeff, you said it again, say it one more time. I
am the face of dementia.
And when people
I am the face of Alzheimer's.
When people see your face, they no longer can stigmatize and say these cruel things flippantly and be more sensitized because people like yourself are speaking out. We have 2 minutes left in our interview time. I want to ask you, is there something that people would be surprised to learn about you?
Certainly. Well, I'm an avid vegetable gardener. I love to garden. I love to mow my lawn. I love swimming. I'm rather active. I have a bunch of pets, 2 cats, 2 dogs. Actually, 1 dog, and we're getting another little puppy this weekend. A goldfish. Have 3 kids in college. My wife and I are married for 12 years. We have a very successful blended family. But what's interesting is that I'm a pretty normal guy. I don't think there's anything really special about me. I'm just a pretty normal guy. Well, all of those things who happens to have Alzheimer's.
I love your message. I thank you, Jeff, for joining me today for Voices with Dementia.
It was my pleasure. Thank you so much.